Welcome, everybody. Hopefully you are here for the new housing tools since you registered, and we'll give everybody kind of a minute to roll in. Before we get started, I just want to ask you to please mute your microphones while we get through the presentation, and then afterwards you can certainly unmute and ask questions. And it's up to you if you want to leave your camera on or off. And we'll get started in just a few minutes here. All right, everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute as we admit people, but this is a webinar on the new housing tools. Just want to ask you to please mute your microphones. You can put any questions in the Q&A, and hopefully any questions that we cannot answer today, we will follow up afterwards. And while everybody's kind of rolling in, I just want to introduce our speakers. We did not set this up as webinar style because we wanted to be able to interact with you. So we have Andrea Jacobs, if she could just give a little hand wave. She is our Emmett County Housing Ready Program Director. We have Jen Rigtrink from Michigan Municipal League, who's going to join us from the Housing Michigan Coalition. And then Kent Wood, who is with Borealis Strategic, and he's also our policy advisor. And then we may have a few others pop on here. Mike Franziak from Muskegon is the planning director, and he's going to help talk or answer some questions about NEZs. And then we'll go from there. So thank you everybody for being here. And I am going to go on to the next slide, hopefully. Make sure this all works. We are recording this so that we can send it to anybody who couldn't make it. And today we're going to go over the new tools again. You might have been a part of a webinar a couple of weeks ago, but we just kind of want to set the framework. I'm going to have Kent and Jen kind of talk about the Housing Michigan Coalition and those tools. Andrea and I will go over some case study examples. And then in this PowerPoint, we have resources and links. And then we'll go over the Housing Michigan 2.0. So what's coming next this year that we'll need your help on. So I'm going to turn it over to Kent first to kind of give us an overview of the Housing Michigan Coalition and the new tools, and he and Jen will probably tag team this part.
Great, thank you, Yarrow, and good morning, everyone. So along the right-hand side there, you see a number of the organizations that we've been really glad to work with. I guess let me back up real quick and just mention that I'm Kent Wood. I own a consulting firm called Borealis Strategic, and I work with Housing North, and I've been working with Housing North since 2019, largely on their statewide and some federal, but mostly statewide policy objectives and advocacy efforts. And we certainly have not done this alone. And I think it was probably back in the fall, September, October, Jen, of 2021, when we first started talking with Jen and MML and Grand Rapids Chamber, Home Builders Association, Housing Next. There's some others like CEDM, some of the chambers, the Realtors Association, really started talking about putting something together statewide and looking at trying to quickly seize the momentum and get some housing policy accomplished over that next term. In 2021, we had an election coming up that year, so we knew starting in 2022, we were going to have a new term. Wanted to find some things that we could, as all these kind of different organizations that were all interested in doing something policy-wise in housing, we wanted to find some issues that were simpler, easier, if you will, that we knew at least we could all get behind, and we knew were needed or requested changes out there. And so working together, we were fortunate. In December of last year, Governor Whitmer signed 4 bills designed to allow local units of government and housing developers to work together directly to build or rehabilitate housing units up to 120% of the area median income in exchange for a discount in property taxes for those units. Two of the programs really already existed, already out there. That's the pilot payment-in-lieu-of-taxes and the neighborhood enterprise zone. And these two tools were quite simply expanded upon, as we'll get into a little bit later. Two of the tools, the Attainable Housing and Rehabilitation Act and the Residential Facilities Exemption, were newer tools, at least newer tools for residential that hadn't existed before. Although both of those are also a bit similar to the NEZ, were also based on the Industrial Facilities Exemption Act that had been kind of part of the Michigan industrial and economic development toolbox for a number of decades now. So really all four either existed or had their foot in the door in Michigan policy already. Jen, anything to add upon there?
I don't think so. I think you covered it well.
Nailed it. Next slide, please. I think the big thing here today is we're going to get into some case studies to kind of talk through how some of these work. I think some of you on the call already have at least a little bit of an existing knowledge. Maybe you've attended the webinar that was previously held a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not going to go through these slide by slide, but I just want to cover a few key points for each of these acts, each of these new laws, and then we can get into some case studies. So starting with one of our new tools for residential, the Residential Facilities Act exemption. This is for your larger developments, 5 units plus, $50,000 or more in investment. The local unit of government creates the district, just like they would have with the Industrial Facilities Act. They create the district. The property owner then can apply for the exemption. That exemption is calculated as 50% of the state average mills for commercial, industrial, and utility property, multiplied by the taxable value of that real property minus the land cost. As with all four of these, this is good for units up to 120% of the area median income. So 120% AMI is the ceiling. There really is no floor. That's up for the local unit of government to decide. So up to 120% AMI, and for each unit, no more than 30% of that household income can go towards the rent for that unit. And then that exemption can be up to 12 years, at least 1 year, up to 12 years. If it's 7 or less years, then the local unit of government just has to let the district or the property owner know, what the timing, what the process would be if they want to file for an exemption to get those remaining years. All right, next slide. Actually, Ken, anything to add there? Okay. Attainable Housing Facilities Act, very, very similar to the RFE and the Residential Facilities Exemption in how that process is structured. One key difference is that this is for 4 units and below, and has a much smaller threshold. I believe it's $5,000 of investment that's required in order to be eligible for this. But kind of same scenario as the Residential Facilities Exemption. The local unit of government creates the district. The property owners then are able to apply for that exemption. Taxes is calculated the same way. 50% of the average mills for commercial, industrial, and utility, multiplied by the taxable value of that real property minus the land. Again, exemption up to 12 years, can be up to 120% AMI for those units, no more than 30% of the household income. Neighborhood enterprise zone. Okay, this, probably some familiarity with this. This already existed, had been around for at least a couple of decades now, if not more. The way it was structured before, it was really limited to which cities could use this. And again, it had to be cities, kind of had to be one of the state's few core communities that could use this. And so what this new law does is expands that. So any city, village, or township is now eligible to use the NEZ. Again, it changes that eligibility, where it's now you're eligible to use it up to 120% of the area median income. One of the key differences in this from the two previous ones, the residential facilities and the attainable housing, is that the NEZ does continues to encourage compact development. And so there's a requirement in there that it be either adjacent to an existing development or uses pre-existing infrastructure. And Jen, I don't know if you've got a little bit more on that too. I know that's something that the league was very interested in as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking to be able to expand the tool to more local units of government outside of previously you having to fit the qualified local unit of government as in the Obsolete Property Rehabilitation Act, the OPRA Act. So this does expand the tool, but we didn't want it to be used for sprawl development. And so that's why you see those guardrails around existing infrastructure, adjacent development, so that we are expanding the tool, but not having it be used for not having unintended consequences of doing that.
Thanks, Jen. One additional thing I wanted to add to is the neighborhood enterprise zone. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, that exemption may be up to 15 years. So the other two we talked about were up to 12 years. NEZ can be used up to 15 years. Next slide. Okay, and this is just this talked about the expansion of it as I was talking about. A couple of really nice links here too. One from the MEDC on the previous NEZ as it existed, and then some documents. I think this is kind of a Q&A, or not a Q&A, but a frequently asked questions from the State Tax Commission on the NEZ. Very detailed, but lots of information in those two documents.
And Kent, I just put a slide in here. This is Yarrow to give some links to some existing municipalities that have used this tool previous to it being expanded. And then the link with the document really lists all of those NEZs that you could look up if you wanted to and find out who has actually used this tool. So we will email this out at the end of the power to all those who registered, so you can check out these links. And also just wanted to give a reference for sort of this is an example from the city of Muskegon, where they designated a neighborhood enterprise zone. And maybe before we move on, I guess I just wanted to see, is Mike on the call here? Mike from Muskegon, if you're here, maybe you could just give a wave or go off mute.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Well, gonna mute this guy here. All right, well, just wanted to say hi and see if you had anything to just add briefly here about what the experience has been like, in Muskegon with using this tool, maybe a few reasons, or you've seen people apply to use this tool in your community.
Yeah, it's been a really good tool for us in Muskegon. We have an NEZ district that's basically in our core neighborhood, which focuses on rehabbing a lot of houses. But really over the past 5 years, we've done a lot of infill housing development in that area as well, and in areas of our downtown. And it's really been a tool that's helped us get some big projects off the ground, especially mixed use developments with condos or apartments above. So we have probably 3 or 4 developments in our downtown High Point Flats, the Leonard, and Lakeview Lofts. All were able to utilize that, and it was really able to get them over the edge and get the projects feasible.
And Mike, can you just maybe speak a little bit to like how much, I guess, how does the you handle this administratively? And is it something that the community really embraced, or was it at all, I guess, controversial when you designated this neighborhood enterprise zone?
You know, the community's been very well open to it. We've had to expand our districts a couple of times. We have that core neighborhood in our downtown where we've had it, and then we did have to expand it to include these mixed use developments. Now you're only allowed to have 15% of your land in your city designated towards NEZ. So each time we do that, we've got to go in front of our commission and the public and prove to them that we're under that 15%, and then give them a refresher on what this incentive is and what it entails and what we're giving up. And each time, you know, it's been very well accepted and received. People are usually a little reluctant to know that tax dollars are being avoided for projects, but this program is, like I said, really helped jumpstart our development downtown, and I think people look at it as a positive light.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We may have some questions, you know, towards the end if you can stick around, but just appreciate you being here. And I did link to their website. Muskegon has a really great website that talks about all the different tools, you know, not just NEZs. So Kent, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'll, I guess, turn it back to you here.
No, I think, Yarrow, if we're getting into the case studies, then I'm good to go.
Well, I think the only other one is just pilot. So we'll just jump into
Yeah.
pilots quick, and then we'll go into the case studies.
Sure, lest we forget pilots, right? This this one just had a lot of support statewide. I mean, they all did, but certainly this one, because I think a lot of folks, a lot of communities around the state, certainly probably many, if not all on this call, are familiar with payment in lieu of taxes. That's something that any community that has had a developer go through a low-income housing tax credit process will have seen the pilot. That developer would have come to the community for a payment in lieu of tax as part of their application for LIHTC. What this bill does is, or what the new law does, is basically expand the use of that pilot now to allow local units of government and developers to enter into a pilot agreement, again, up to 120% area median income, up to a term of 15 years, without the need for or without a LIHTC application or any other kind of state or federal tax credit on the table. That was not allowed previously. Now, again, this kind of removes that requirement to compete for, in many cases, highly competitive LIHTC programs, and allows that unit of government and that developer to enter into that agreement without any other programs or tax incentives out there. Jen, anything before?
I think you covered it great.
All right. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kent. And I guess this is just me putting in some slides from my own brain, trying to wrap my head around these different tools. So just wanted to share these where I think in a sense, one of the tools, 3 of the tools could possibly be used with a brownfield TIF or tax incremental financing. We're not going to go into detail here, but I did just want to make this point, and that a couple of the tools, you know, really are targeted towards multifamily and rental units, but 2 of the tools, so the Attainable Housing District and NEZs, could be used for rehabilitation and single family homes, depending on the designation of the NEZ. So I just wanted to share these. And then also point out that like with a pilot is sort of a standalone tool and ordinance that you would negotiate with a unit of government, whereas the NEZ Residential Facilities Act and Attainable Housing Districts do need to be created, and that's where the property owner would apply for that tax abatement. So this is just me trying to separate them out in my brain. Hopefully that is helpful to you all as well. And then I'm going to turn it over here, I think on the next slide, to Andrea, just to briefly talk about a case study example. Now, keep in mind, this is an example. We haven't yet had somebody create a attainable housing district, but we wanted to kind of point out how this might work and how it might be beneficial to a private property owner. And this is an example in Petoskey. So Andrea, I'm going to ask you to just share a little bit of what you'd like to share, what you're doing in Emmett County, and how this tool might apply in your community.
Sure, thanks you guys. Again, I'm Andrea Jacobs. I'm the Emmett County Housing Ready Program Director for Housing North. So I work in Emmett County to help the different communities become more housing ready, which I think is an important point that Kent brought up earlier. And Yarrow said, I think in a discussion sort of in advance of this meeting is, our communities are so excited about these tools, but there is a little bit of work that we need to do in advance of them, which is, sort of establishing some of these planning and zoning barriers or reducing these barriers, like the density that Jennifer talked about, making sure that those 4 to 5 units per acre are allowable in your community, which we have done in Emmett County almost across the board, specifically in Petoskey. And having the sort of the language set up in advance and making sure that we've taken those steps as a community, like the ordinances for some of these local priorities. Now that they've been untethered to the federal restrictions, we as a community have been empowered to be able to identify what our needs are locally and what our priorities are in advance. But we do have to have that in place before we can use some of these tools. So that's part of, how we're becoming housing ready in Emmett County. And Petoskey specifically, like Yarrow said, this is sort of an imaginary example, but we do have the language that says this property owner, Becky, for example, is allowed to own a duplex and rent both units. One does not need to be owner occupied. Not all of our communities in Emmett County have that language, but Petoskey does. So this example for Becky, the property owner, to rent both units of a duplex as sort of as a workforce housing or a missing middle opportunity here. The second bullet talks about the property tax for the Attainable Housing District, that 100% for one unit of the area median income and 80% at the other. Now that's an example, like Kent said, it can go up to 120%. So this might be an example of an ordinance that Petoskey has in place to say, these are our priority target zones. And this would enact, or get that tax incentive enacted. So she would invest a certain amount in rehabilitating the units and then agree to make sure that her renters are meeting that target sort of income. And again, we're still tied to that HUD-MSHDA sort of yearly chart of our county's area median income and affordability numbers. So we're still working with that same matrix there. And in Petoskey, that states that the one at 1,400 would be attainable for, say, Ben and Susan and their family, and the 1,600 are, sorry, we're going to switch that around. 1,600 would be the larger unit for Ben and Susan and their family, and it is not above 30% of their income. Now, when Yarrow talked a little bit about some of those administrative kind of, I won't say burdens, but sort of responsibilities that the community is accepting, is making sure that we're checking in on that affordability of our residents and sort of overseeing with the property owners that those targets are met consistently year after year. Again, in Petoskey, an example would be, this looks like, year-round residents, but in Petoskey, we might want to say 90 days, for a rental unit in order to accommodate some seasonal workforce in our downtown area. Now, that's another example of some flexibility there, but it does actually increase the administrative burden of making sure that each resident then meets those targets. So that's a discussion that needs to happen in advance in the community. And that's a really strong point of empowerment for us as voting bodies and our discussions with our members of the public to identify those needs in advance and be part of this development, in our community as a development partner here. So as an example, this duplex could be a really powerful way to get, 2 families in where one house existed before, and an opportunity for a local community member to lease to our workforce and our community to incentivize this rehabilitation and development. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. I'm going to just go over a couple examples here. And again, keep in mind, these are examples. We're basing them off of some potential developments, but the numbers I would not do check my math 100%, but we're trying to provide an example here. And in this case, I used this on the webinar on the 24th, but the city of Traverse City is updating their pilot ordinance right now. They have had a request for a pilot. And I'm going to just go into a little bit of how what we want to emphasize here is how a pilot essentially works and how the costs right now per unit, and this is just a general of taxes, would be about $5,500 a year actually passed on to the tenant. But if you were to have a pilot here, you could see how those taxes passed on to the tenant would be reduced and overall allow the developer to then provide monthly rents between 80 and 120% of the AMI. And again, when we're talking about affordability, we really don't want people to be paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And that is kind of what these numbers are based off, as well as the HUD and MSHDA rates. So this is an example of a pilot. Again, it's just a broad example looking at a makeup of a studio apartments all the way up to 2-bedroom apartments in a city. I did just want to point out that for neighborhood enterprise zones, whoops, sorry, my fingers are moving a little too quickly here. There are a couple different options. And here we have an example where it has to be 10 platted parcels within the downtown area of Traverse City. But then you could also do a larger area. And as Mike pointed out, it just can't be more than 15%, I think, of that existing district within the city, cover that much area. So this is a tool to definitely consider, depending on if it's a more neighborhood type environment or somewhere downtown where you might want to have a developer invest in housing. And this is just a very broad example of kind of the difference. So in the case of a pilot, it's a 9% of those taxes, but in the case of an NEZ, it's 50% of those property taxes. So they're different tools and different benefits, but this just kind of shows, I guess, an example of the savings to the tenant using an NEZ. And this is, again, just an example property. And I see I didn't adjust my numbers here, but looking at 76 units using an NEZ. So I don't want to get too into the weeds on these examples, but I do want to, hopefully they are useful to you, and we can at Housing North, as well as your local economic development groups or others, be here to kind of run the numbers and see maybe which tool would work for your particular development and if the zoning makes sense for that particular tool. I'm going to turn it back over to Kent and Jen just for a minute before we open it up to questions, because we do want to see if we can answer some questions and hear from you, just to talk a little bit about the next steps for the Housing Michigan Coalition, because there are some exciting stuff happen, and then we will open it up to questions. So Kent, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Yarrow. So again, we were really, really pleased with the success last year in getting the 4 bills signed, but we're not done. Clearly we had some other bills that were part of that package that we had to kind of snip away as the process moved on, that didn't quite have the support, weren't quite ready to go. And we also know that there are other issues out there that need some addressing as well. So we are, as the Housing Coalition is looking at our next steps. What's the next package that we want to bring forward this year? And these are some of the items that we're looking at. I will not go into great detail on any of them. A lot of these still need to be hashed out a little bit more before they're ready for prime time. One that I can tell you, though, that Jen and I can tell you is the first bullet point up there, allowing residential uses as part of tax increment financing is something that there have been some bills introduced. We're supposed to have a committee hearing tomorrow in the Senate Housing and Human Services Committee tomorrow at noon. And so that's I know that's something we're really excited about, getting this process started. We've had a lot of very positive conversations with state legislators in both the House and the Senate so far this year. I think Jen would agree. There are I would say we have a very healthy lineup of folks, of legislators that not only want to support housing and housing legislation, but want to be leaders in it as well. They want to be bill sponsors and want it to come to their committees. So I know we're very excited about 2023 and 2024. Jen, anything else that you want to add from the leads perspective?
That we, one, of course, we are working towards, sustainable funding at the state level, but are very focused on, local tools and local resources, because while housing is a huge issue across our state, it's different in every community, and the need, whether it's the type of housing or the AMI factors of what income levels you're needing to focus on. We have really tried to do previously, and what we're doing going forward, allowing that flexibility. I know a lot of times it's very easy. It would be much easier on the private side to have the exact same thing in every community, but the needs are different in our communities. And that's why we allow for that flexibility of the locals being able to decide the income levels, the level of incentive that they are able to forego as well.
And I would just give a couple of quick examples too. So the four that we've been taught, the four new laws that we've been talking about so far really really deal with local units of government working with developers. We also really wanted to find some opportunities to get employers and really incentivize employers into the mix. Many of them, as are contributing to housing or looking at ways to do that. And so from a public policy standpoint, we want to find ways to further incentivize that. And then as Jen mentioned too, we want to be able to find some and allow for some creative ways for local units of government, philanthropic organizations, community foundations, you name it, communities in general, to be able to raise sustainable revenue on their own for housing and not always have to rely on how much funding is coming into the state or from the federal government. So those are kind of two key focus areas that we have.
Awesome. Thanks, Kent. I guess there is one question in the chat that might be something Jen or you could even answer, or maybe Andrea and I too. But just if we're giving these tax abatements to developers, what is the benefit of still having these people come and live in our community? Or I guess what is being added to the local tax base when you have, say, a 74 unit development coming in, whereas before you didn't? And so Jen, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, or Andrea or Kent.
I can start. Of course, population growth everywhere in our state is the only way for us economically to grow and prosper. So but when we are able to grow population, that is huge. When you are able to rehab or have new construction, you are able to lift surrounding property values as well, especially when you are dealing with previously blighted or vacant properties. So that now in a municipal finance sense, when properties are increased in value and then sold, you have that property tax pop-up effect. The actual local unit of government, because of the interaction between Headley and Proposal A, does not allow for the local unit of government to capture that pop-up. Because I know there's a lot of misnomer out there that when property values increase, that means that increase is going back to the local unit of government, and that just isn't how it works because of that interplay between Prop A and Headley. But definitely, I mean, when you have more users in your systems and services, and more people paying for that, and just yeah, that is definitely a plus.
You'd think I know how to use the unmute button by now. Andrea or Kent, did you want to add at all to any of that?
I'll jump in a little bit there, Jen. I agree with you, and I appreciate the details about some of the tax sort of prohibition there. But anytime we're increasing our economic participation, we have a little bump in population there. That's awesome for our schools. It's awesome for our local businesses. It's definitely, from an employer standpoint, it increases our hireability pool. Some of these, as far as a succession strategy in our businesses here, as we're looking toward our skilled labor retiring and things like that, anything that acts as an attraction to our communities will impact in a way that maybe isn't quite directly related to those taxes paid per unit, but is impacting so many more community members and so many more aspects of our community in a positive way. And, definitely that blight and, some of our communities that just have, so they have space and they have opportunity, and it makes our neighborhoods more viable. It makes our businesses more viable. It makes our infill. I appreciate what you said about attending to the sprawl and making sure that we're filling in as much as we can where we have that infrastructure, and creating that vibrancy in our communities. I think it's hard to measure, but it's really, really an important part of our development.
Well said, Andrea. Thank you. I'm gonna just mention the slide, and then I can close the slideshow and we can turn it over to chat officially or questions. But these are just a few links to some resources. We have some on our website. Of course, Michigan Municipal League has a lot on their website, and then the Housing Michigan Coalition. So if you haven't yet signed up for the Housing Michigan Coalition, I would encourage you to do so. There will probably and hopefully be some calls to action coming up. And then, as Kent may have mentioned, when there is a committee hearing or something, we would love cards of support. And so, Jen, I don't know if you and Kent want to just briefly mention how people do that.
Yes. So, I mean, if you are already part of the Housing Michigan Coalition, we did put a call out, an email, well, it's been a week, but for the testimony on the housing TIF bills tomorrow in Senate Housing and Human Services. Make sure I get the committee name right. There is on the Michigan legislative website, the committees. You can email the clerk and ask them to submit a card of support with your name and organization. As the coalition, we put a call out for that, and we'll submit cards for folks that are interested in that as well, and anticipate doing that. So going forward with other legislation as they get rolling here this session.
Awesome, thank you. I do see that a couple of our Housing Ready staff, so Zach and Tracy, are on the call here too. So I was just going to say, Zach, Tracy, maybe you could give a little wave and let them know you're on here. So they are also resources in our 10-county community. Zach, 10-county region. Zach is in Leelanau and Tracy is in Manistee. And then, so now there are a few questions in the chat, thankfully, and one of them has to do with ADUs. So I'm going to see if any one of us here can actually to answer this. And this said, could any of the listed incentives apply to a single homeowner adding a full-time year-round duplex or ADU to their property, assuming the local ordinance, would allow that? And so I think I know the answer, but I guess I was going to give maybe Andrea or Kent or Jen a chance to answer too. Could this new attainable housing district or an NEZ apply to an ADU? I think. Let's find out is the answer. No, I think so.
I think
Yeah,
it could. Yeah, I mean, assuming it, it would likely, if it's just one unit, would have to be within the NEZ, an NEZ district or an attainable housing district.
Yeah, I agree with what Ken said. Technically, I think yes. There's nothing stopping it from applying. It's just working with that local unit of government and it being in one of the districts.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so here's another one here that I'm just going to read and see if we can tackle it. And again, if we can't tackle it on the call today, we will try to get back to you with answers. But in a rural county using a 40-unit apartment development as an example, is there any mechanism for neighboring townships or villages to join with the host municipality in supporting a development? That development is going to benefit multiple municipalities. I don't know who might want to take this one. I'm going to take myself off mute and see.
So in supporting that development, are you mean in like a service sharing kind of?
And maybe if the person who asked the
Financially.
question can add to that in the chat, or you can come off mute. I'll double check the language to see if I understand it again.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I'm sure there are ways to, support it in concept or in spirit. I'm not sure though, if anything that any of the tools we've discussed today though, would be a fit though. Because again, I think that the property's got to be within that taxing unit in order to get the exemption or to get the relief. Now, if there were, some kind, something that we're looking at doing in our 2.0 agenda, would be to allow different local units of government to, form kind of a joint, a joint housing commission kind of thing where they could, put resources together in a fund, whether they levy a millage, whether they, just, put funding every year towards that, where they could then, pool some funding to be able to start contributing to different developments. But that's something that we're working on right now. I'm not sure if there's a way to financially contribute within the context of the tools that we've discussed so far today.
okay, and I think there are some questions. The questions that I saw most recently have to do with whether or not a business can donate to a development to offset infrastructure costs or receive a tax benefit. Ken, I don't know if you want to try to answer that one, or I guess if they're a nonprofit, there can be a donation option,
Right.
of course.
Yeah, not to my knowledge right now, but again, that is one of the tools that we are looking at doing. That we had we'd had that bill drafted last year. That was one of the bills, unfortunately, that just didn't get support, largely from Treasury, and so we had to kind of cut that one away to move forward. So not at this point, but that is, I would say, I think a priority for the coalition to find some kind of tool like that does incentivize or continue to or incentivize employers to start contributing to that housing, whether it's down payment assistance for their employee, all the way across the scale to building their own residential facility.
And then we won't get into the weeds on this, but I think there's also options for like long-term leases or investing, in a property to secure, lease agreements with a developer. So I don't know if anybody's on the call that is a developer, who has done that or would like to speak to that, but that could also be, one way right now that say an employer or somebody could, I guess, invest into a project. And give a minute to see. I see there's a couple more questions in the chat, but just wanted to see if anybody had a live question that we can go to. I'm just going to go off gallery mode so I can see if there's any hands raised. I guess one question was about TIF for residential, and I don't know that we want to answer that on the call here, but I think that is something that we could run through and talk about how that might work for that person who put that in the chat with some more specifics. But any other questions? Lisa, were you going to say something? Oh.
I just commented on the gentleman asking about the tax incentive for infrastructure. I think there's a chance he could work with his local community foundation and they may be able to do something there. His donation to his community foundation would be tax exempt. And then they'd have to check with them to see if they could create some sort of donor advised fund. Doreen would be a great one to ask in Cadillac, or you can contact whatever community foundation is in your area.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Lisa. I was going to mention that myself when I saw your comment in the chat there. And our community foundation does have a housing solutions fund that is meant for pre-development costs. And I think it could be arguable that these are really functional ways for larger businesses or employers or community members to get that tax incentive, but not through any of these particular tools. And I also just wanted to mention the importance of that intergovernmental cooperation, not directly related to the question earlier, but I think in preparing our communities and designating some of these areas and zones, it's really important for our neighboring districts and communities to be in contact with one another and really being engaged in how our zoning and planning is evolving in a more holistic way. So we can create maybe a larger district that crosses two, or a larger enterprise zone maybe that crosses two districts, or knowing where some of those borders are and where those opportunities are, and having that conversation, not just one island at a time for the townships or the local municipalities, making sure that we're having that larger conversation in how we grow as a community, I think is really, really important, and a great opportunity for us to participate. Maybe not, like Kent said, financially being able to both take advantage of it for one development, but create opportunities in a larger geographic sense for multiple development and infill. And in that way, we both would get to.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. There was a clarifying statement in the chat, so I'm just going to read it and see if we can get back to that question here quickly. And let me find it here. Basically, how do neighboring, so this is not just related to the 4 new laws, but in general, how do neighboring government units share the impact of reducing taxes to encourage the development of affordable housing? So Jen or Kent or Andrea, I don't know if that helps clarify that, or if we can speak to that, but or if you feel like we answered it as best as we could.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a municipal attorney actually on this webinar that wants to speak up, I think that's there's a lot of legal implications when you talk about cross-jurisdictional sharing of taxes and or services. And so I would hate to have anybody interpret something we say on here, lead them down the wrong path, that engage with a municipal attorney on how that might work best, or if it's even possible in some circumstances.
Awesome. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to give people a chance to answer live. I also will just say before we go to live questions that we will email the copy of the PowerPoint and the recording out, as well as have some of the questions that we couldn't answer. We will try to follow up and get those answered as best as we can, or direct them to somebody who can help answer them. So is there anybody who has a question right now that you want to ask, or something that you want to share before we wrap up? I know that I'm going to put a call out to any unit of government on this call to test one of these new tools, and hopefully we can have an example. I know I've been talking to Josh in Frankfurt, and I think especially the two new tools, we really are looking for a community to step up and try them, especially in Northwest Michigan. So I'm going to look once more just to make sure I didn't see any hands up. Or any more questions. Andrea, Kent, or Jen, did you want to add anything before we wrap up?
I would just piggyback real quick on what you said, Yarrow, about looking for people to different units and developers to sort of be the tip of the spear. But remember that with all of these, all four of them have already previously existed in some capacity. Pilots and NEZs have been around. I think, Yarrow, you had a great slide there with those communities that have designated NEZs. Those are great resources. Pilots have been around. It's a very similar process to what has already existed. Just even more flexibility for the unit of government. And then even the two new tools are really largely based, if not carbon copied, on the industrial facilities exemption that I know a lot of communities have used to some capacity, especially especially during the last recession. Those tools were really critical for keeping and expanding industrial type of businesses and manufacturing businesses. So these have been around, and I think there are a lot of resources out there that you don't feel like you'll have to go this alone, or are doing anything that that is really new, that nobody has ever experienced before.
And I was just gonna reinforce what Andrea said about the more regional planning and collaborating aspect as we move forward, and looking at the housing needs of on a bigger regional scale, and then how we can apply these tools in working together is going to be vital in going forward.
Thanks, Jen. Andrea, did you want to share any last words before we wrap up?
No, not individually, but I really appreciate this as an exercise and introducing these tools in a way that is more relevant for our region, our rural communities, trying to go through this and fit each one where they're appropriate. And hopefully everybody at the community level, development level, and wider gives us a little bit of grace and patience as we learn through it, and are willing to put the energy forward in this learning curve, and being able to apply it, and really getting excited about what it may mean for us, on the larger scale. I think it's super cool, and I look forward to practicing some of these and being a resource for any of my communities and more, at Housing North, so that we can get better at it and have it be less and less intimidating as we go. I think it's amazing. And the work that is done at the state level has given us a real boost in our rural communities. So thank you for the work you've done, and giving us access to some of these tools that we've never had before.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for coming. I should note that, we are learning, like Andrea said, as we're going, and there was a question about sort of a step-by-step or kind of how to walking through these tools. And I will say we're working on those, both at Housing North with Housing Next and in partnership with the Housing Michigan Coalition. So we'll make sure we get those to you as soon as we have them. And then as always, reach out anytime. I will email out the slides, so you'll have Kent and Jen's and Andrea and my contact information. And again, just thank you for participating. I think that's a wrap, guys. So and we'll email out answers to all the questions. So thanks, everyone.